Mm-hmm.
This is our time capsule episode.
This is 100% our time capsule episode.
Did you? Nick probably didn't even notice this, that the colors of the Superpower Happy Hour logo, it's North Carolina Tar Heel blue, and it's Iowa Hawkeyes gold. And that's
drags.
It was the perfect combination of Will and myself.
That's right, and it all originated. This kind of Superpower Happy Hour origin story in Chapel Hill. Right down the road.
Boom.
In this building, like upstairs, where I'm in the building.
Because we were gonna do something different, and then Will pulled Superpower Happy Hour out of his freaking keister, and I was like, well, we've got to do that. We've got to do that instead of whatever we were going to do.
That's right.
Even in the program, it was wrong. We were like, Trip, that's not what we're talking about. Because we were going to do Judgment Day.
We're going to do a whole Judgment Day X-Men crossover, really kind of niche comic book apocalyptic stuff. But we decided we're just going to geek out and ask people what they like. Superpower Happy Hour.
Hell yeah, dude. I mean, Superpower Happy Hour, as soon as you sent it, I was like, why hasn't anyone thought of that before? I mean, y'all did it first.
I got really hesitant because Will was like, what was our thing called? And I was like, it's such a good name. I don't really want to give it up. But because Will and I, like, I don't know, it's just like it felt right. And it feels right for like that spin-off kind of offshoot homebrewed Christianity kind of thing. It feels very Trip-esque, I guess. Yeah, but no, it was a great, honestly, that was the fact that like Tolkien heads and like us and Systematic Geekology, Christian Humanists, like the fact that we all went on kind of last and we were in the youth room, it kind of made me like more excited to be like, okay, there might only be like 25 people in this room. We are going to turn it out and we are going to like have the rowdiest room possible, because after 2 days of like really heavy we started our session with like, hey, if you're not at a theology thing right now, you might be a little exhausted.
Yeah.
And at one point in our panel, like, we'll talk about this in a minute, but like we started talking like She-Hulk spoilers, and some guy, like, bless his heart, like tried to get out of the room and like tripped and fell, and we had to help him up. It was like,
he spilled beer all over himself too.
Yeah. It was like, I felt so bad, and I forgot his name. He might even be watching this. Like, God bless you. But the fact that like he cared about spoilers was even like heartwarming for me. I was like, oh, see,
that's why he left the room.
Yeah, he was like, I don't want to hear the spoilers.
I never found that out. That's so cool.
It might have been Rings of Power, or even one of the shows like didn't want spoilers. It was like, get me the hell out of here. I'm not going to get spoiled. I want to see it. I was like, that's such a favorite geek thing to do.
Makes so much sense. And if that person is listening or watching, like, let one of us know, because that was one of my favorite moments.
I know.
Was it completely like halt the episode, what's going on, man? And it just wanted to get out of the room. That makes it infinitely better.
Well, I think
go ahead, Will.
No, I was just gonna say, here we are in the Homebrewed live stream. You might be noticing that someone's missing. Trip's not feeling that well.
Oh, is there supposed to be another guy here?
Who is that guy?
We've kind of taken over.
Who?
We've taken over the Homebrewed channel. It looks like it's been hacked by a bunch of geeks, and we're just like, oh no, call security. But I feel like I need to do a little intro, like with kind of in the way Trip does things. So I'm gonna do it. You guys ready?
So ready.
Okay, here we go. Hello, theology nerds. You're listening to Homebrew Christianity, or Tolkien Heads, or Across the Bifrost, or Secret Art Project, or Systematic Geekology, or maybe all at once. But we are glad that you are here with
surround sound,
experiencing God with the Geek Pods. Like, it's been super fun seeing Trip be hang out in these class forums and live streams with people who are at Theology Beer Camp. A bunch of the God Pods got together, and they're talking about how they experience God and the world and the human condition. Where there's another little contingency at Theology Beer Camp, the Geek Pods. Yeah, we geek out with our nerd out, or nerd out with a geek out, however you want to say it. I got pint glass to prove it.
I should have brought my pint glass. Dang it.
Cheers, fellas.
Nick
But
wins the mug, the cup competition though.
Branson,
This
Tony,
this is a
baby.
gift from Trip. So, and by the way, hold on, really quick. When I get a sip, check this out.
Oh, it has his name underneath there.
Very nice. I just
Mm.
have my I have issues Marvel mug.
Ah, so
One of my favorite Christmas gifts I've ever received.
Incredible.
And so, like, you may be asking out there, audience and friends, why are we on the Homebrew Christianity? We kind of asked ourselves that also at Theology Beer Camp, because Trip brings in like leading theologians and philosophers and scholars to talk about and unpack this theme of experiencing God with over 200 people who are longing for community and connection and asking the big questions. We provided a safe space for people to just gather together, be with one another, and ask and wrestle with the big questions. And so, among those God pods and leading theologian philosophers, here comes like the geek pods, like Talking Heads and Across the Bifrost and Systematic Geekology, and we kind of ask ourselves, we're just happy to be there because some of our like podcast heroes are there, and I get to shake their hand and give them high fives and share a beer with them. But the more we thought about it and kind of processed it, that like these stories that we geek out on, these meta narratives that capture our imagination in this kind of post-Christian, post-Christendom world, carry a lot of meaning and help folks process really the big questions that everyone wrestles with. And so through these meta narratives, people do experience God or ask the big questions, and they were asking in the realm of theology and philosophy too. So, just to throw a softball kind of question out there to Nick and Ryan, why do you think these meta narratives are like this leading force these days? People are more comfortable wrestling with like Star Wars and the MCU and Rings of Power than they are perhaps Scripture in their sanctuaries. So, it's just a light question to get us started. Go for it, guys.
Yeah, just a softball to lob it in there. Nick, you wanna swing first?
Yeah, sure. I think about this shit all the time. It's like why, and just more about why people engage pop culture so much easier and wrestle with things than going to church or other religious experiences. And I think part of it is like, throughout history, most time religion and culture are kind of intermingled. And I think it's still that way, but the way that, especially us in like the United States, Canada, Europe, all these other places, like religion and culture are perceived as separate. And so it's more safe to wrestle with deep questions and in like a medium of comic books or TV or having a conversation with friends about those shows rather than discussing like the essentials of like the universe and beliefs and religion that ends up just kind of making people cringe or angry. And so I think people are interested in these things because it's a safe space to explore it. And I think it's just a product of our separation of church and state, if you will.
I mean, I think that's a really good point. Just to like piggyback real quick on that is any discussion is made like 10 times better if you can have like a philosophical, existential debate or conversation about the universe and purpose and belonging and being. If you add some lightsabers into it, it makes it 10 times more fun. You can still have the conversation to its fullness and to its, its full breadth. But like occasionally you get to talk about Darth Vader, or you get to talk about Frodo in the Ring. You get to talk about all these like cool, well-crafted characters within story. Story makes topics that would otherwise be a complete drip, like story and crafting story around like meta narrative, like Will was saying, makes it so much better. And I think great authors and great screenwriters and like great storytellers are able to do that. And that's why you see like Star Wars, for example, become this huge thing. You see Lord of the Rings become this huge thing, Game of Thrones, huge thing, the Marvel movies, huge things, because people can relate to it. Sometimes when you have a medium like religion or church or spirituality, like sometimes it's not accessible to absolutely everybody, but like maybe the other story is accessible, and that's why people feel more comfortable engaging with that. It's because it's just easier. It's got an easier on ramp.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a different kind of sandbox to play in, and as a parish pastor, at the church where Theology Beer Camp was held, I made
Weird
it just
flex, but okay.
no. I just want to say, like, most of my members were kind of like, Theology Beer Camp, okay, whatever. What is that? We know you like to geek out on things. We know you're a theology nerd. We talk about Star Wars a lot, Pastor. I was like, if you and your friends want to hang out and do that, go for it. But I think when it comes to religion and faith and spirituality within Christianity, people bring a lot of nostalgia to the table. They bring a lot of baggage with them,
Ooh, the drug of
assumptions.
nostalgia.
Yeah, and they bring that to the table in this room, and so there's this weight of expectations, or what you think people expect out of you, and so you don't know how to navigate that as much. But I will also say, like, within fandom, within geekdom, we're seeing a rise of toxicity within fandom there too, within nostalgia, or what expectations are. We say, yay, lightsaber battles and theology is so disarming and everybody can get along. No, the Star Wars fandom right now is just as bad as dysfunctional as like the church
gosh.
at the present moment. So even with that, the MCU and characters and gender, sexuality, race, all the big questions that the church has a hard time with, within fandom is growing within that area too. So it's safe, but not as safe as you think. And there still needs to be intentionality behind creating the safe space of having conversations without geek shaming the other person, that kind of thing. So that's kind of what we try to do, Systematic Geekology, in those areas, to try to create a healthier conversation and to say that all people are welcome. But I think, every myth creates its orthodoxy.
Damn.
Then 100%. So yeah, I mean, we can't romanticize Comic-Con culture too. It's fun. It's another safe space. It's an alternative space to explore those big existential questions, but it has its own levels of toxicity and stuff as well too. Nick, I didn't know you were going to say something to chime in with that.
Yeah, I just, it's interesting because I think that's true, is that it's interesting and fun that as somebody, as like a religious person and a theology nerd, like to see that we can have disputes about canon and like what matters in the universe and how it's compiled and whatever. And like, that's super fun. But like you said, it comes with those negative aspects too of wrestling. And even the Tolkien fandom has recently experienced that with Rings of Power, with the same issues you said, representation.
Was that a divisive show? I didn't hear anything about that.
Oh, no. I mean, everyone loved it. So
I thought it was universally beloved by all.
Yeah, it was. You're correct about that. So jumping off of Ryan's sarcasm, if y'all didn't know, very divisive. I mean, it split people, like Tolkien people all over were like, it just split everybody. The algorithms changed, all that stuff. But there's still this safety because, and I want to know what you guys think, because there's not a salvation element to those things, at least not yet, in a lot of cases, where a lot of people's like ultimate destiny is measured by someone's belief systems or how they enact their faith. And even if somebody has a bad opinion, quote unquote, about their favorite IP or what have you, no one's going to be like, your ultimate soul is like, you're in hell forever. You're going to Ragnarok is going to come and just dismantle you forever. So I don't know, like without that element there, what do you guys think?
I think sometimes there's this idea that like if you're going to compare like organized religion to like, say, your favorite fandom, the stakes feel a little bit lower. The stakes feel like, oh, okay, I can engage in this community, I can engage in this fandom, and my soul's not on the line here. Or, people's, eternal significance is not on the line here. And I think one of the things, like when Nick said, like, there's not a salvation element to it, I love how you added yet. I was like, I really want to see where that one goes. But there's not a salvation element to it. There's really not an eternal weight to, like, if you're going to debate someone on we'll get Will all riled up with this one. If you're going to debate prequels, originals, or sequel trilogies of Star Wars, no one's gonna really go to hell based on that, or I'm sorry, no one's gonna have an eternal consequence, or there's not gonna be an eternal significance to the end of that debate. But you do have a great foundation for community building with shared experience, with shared story. Like, I think that's what, like, there are a lot of examples of fandom done well and fandom done poorly. And Will reference toxicity. Toxicity will ruin just about any community it touches, regardless of what the community is built upon. Toxicity gets in and it kind of like it ruins the goodness, the joy, the humanity of whatever community, whether it's your favorite TV show or it's your belief system on a spiritual level. Toxicity is that, like, that disease, that fungus that gets in and eats away at all the good stuff. And that, like I said, that can happen regardless of what that community is built upon. But fandom is really good at building community easily over shared likes and coincidentally shared dislikes. But there sometimes does have this, like, there's this thing where you ever had this happen where you find that you have a similarity with somebody and then it unlocks all the doors?
Totally.
Like, oh, I know Nick likes Lord of the Rings. Well, now I've got about 3 hours of material we can talk about. Will and I bonded over comics. Like, that gives us so much. Like, there's like an easy, like an on-ramp. There's an easy door there. And that's one of, like, the great things about it. That maybe sometimes
you can go down the road of, like, yeah, Ryan and I bonded over Star Wars, but then, like, man, I find out, like, on, like, the third month of knowing each other that he really loves The Last Jedi, and how Luke Skywalker,
he did not find that out from me. That did not happen.
How Luke Skywalker was portrayed in that movie, and we're like, oh, I thought I knew you, Ryan.
You always come back to Luke in Last Jedi.
I know.
It's like you have a beef with Ryan Johnson.
I really like Rian Johnson. I think that this new.
Are you going to recommend that people go watch Knives Out?
100%. I love Knives Out.
Knives Out is really fun.
No, but, like, we talk about the eternal consequences of, like, your fandom. Like, that's not, like, maybe not the major theme, but identity and community. Is important. So if you feel like someone's shitting all over your identity or what you've attached your nostalgia to, or you feel like you're being shunned from a community because they have, like, a different opinion, maybe that's worse. That's the type of hell that we're experiencing here. So I think, if someone ties their identity to this one particular story, like me, my understanding of how Luke Skywalker should be, especially when he's older and a wiser Jedi, and you make a turn or you tell a different kind of story, than my identity and how I understand the world or my fandom is just totally deconstructed. All right, if you want to use that language. And then what does that look like when it's reconstructed, or can I turn back to it at all? I think that's what's going on within these communities. And so yeah, there's not this kind of, like, fear of burning in hell forever, but there is this sense of how I feel in terms of my own identity and the community that I feel like a part of. And that can be just as torturous and scary for some folks and fans.
No, that's true. I hadn't even thought about that, as far as, like, connecting that, as far as making, like, the disappointment or loss that you feel when someone actively dismisses your fandom, or whatever. And how many times have we, like, experienced, like, a dating relationship or something, and you're like, man, I love this type of music, I have to show it to you, and your partner or love interest is like, this is garbage, and you're just like, what? Like, and like you said, I think that's legitimate, because you've invested yourself, like you said, into this. And it's obviously different if someone doesn't know that you've experienced all that, and they're just giving their opinion. But I have people in my life that are like, Lord of the Rings is the worst thing on the planet, and they just say it because they know I'm a fan. And you're like, why are you so hateful?
Nick, you're a little more than a fan. Let's be honest. Like, let nobody listening to this get confused. Nick Polk is not a fan of Lord of the Rings. You're kind of like an obsessed, like, stalker of Lord of the Rings.
So true. You're like, not wrong.
When can I talk about Tolkien? When can I talk about Tolkien?
That's true.
Ladies and gentlemen, and all peoples, if you have not subscribed to Tolkien Pop yet, you need to. I just read Nick's it was my before bed reading last night. I read Nick's breakdown of The Sopranos and how it like correlates with Lord of the Rings. Never would have guessed it in a million years. You actually say that in there. It's like, you might think this doesn't make sense together, but here's why it kind of does. But you should definitely subscribe to Tolkien Pop.
Dude, thanks for that plug. That's what I'm talking. And I created Tolkien Pop, which is my Substack, for that very reason, to create a space where it's like, hey, you like Sopranos? Maybe you don't know a lot about Lord of the Rings, but you know a lot about Sopranos. Here's where we can come together and like share where like we can still enjoy the same thing, and like doing that with multiple fandoms. Because I think that even you guys talk a lot about sports too, and how you can nerd out about sports at the same time with comics, you know?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and we do, yeah.
Yeah, and at our panel at Theology Beer Camp, we, as people were coming in on the whiteboard, we put like, what are you geeking out on? Just to kind of, as a visual to help people see that there is such a diversity in terms of what people geek out on. You know, there was, what are some of the people? I mean, of course, you got the Marvel Universe and Lord of the Rings, and but we had some sitcoms up there. You had some deep cut HBO shows. What did Diana Butler Bass say that she
Columbo
and
Columbo.
People were like, but like
that was a head scratcher.
Yeah, but there's old school and then there's new school. I think they remade like a certain thing. So it's like, dude, everybody. So the tag phrase is like, everybody geeks out on something, and we're not going to geek shame that. It's like, yeah, if you geek out on it, you find meaning in it, and if it's also like entertainment, and it helps you decompress a heavy and toxic world, but it can also help you tap into what it means to be human and make meaning out of this universe. That's why we're tied into like this whole theme of experiencing God, because it's all intertwined and entangled with one another.
So you just said something, and I don't know where I picked this up, but I want to ask my distinguished screen mates here. When it comes to fandoms, do fandoms give us meaning, or do we give fandoms meaning?
Yes.
In your personal opinion,
both.
What does your heart tell you, though? If you had to choose,
if I had to choose, I think it's a false dichotomy. I think they're both in. I think it's
we call that a Kobayashi Maru. In this case.
I have to say that I'm with Will there too, 100%. I think it really is a mixture of both. Now, I think that it depends on what it is that we experience it differently, with like as a spectrum or like a scale rather, where I think that, you know, I watched it. There's an old College Humor video that's like almost over 10 years old now that talk about like religion.
College Humor. I did not think that would be the reference.
Yeah.
I'm buckled up, ready to go.
They do it like a whole thing like about religious fundamentalism. Like basically just religious fundamentalists are just giant nerds. And so, like, that's what they talk about. They're just giant nerds.
Yes,
and,
they are.
You know, you think about that. Like, when I think about my religious experience, like, that just kind of, it's made meaning for me. Yeah. But as far as, like, my interaction with Tolkien, there is a more, like, balance where it gives me meaning. But then my interaction with it, I'm like, oh, man, me interacting with it, like, creates that meaning simultaneously.
So I my like church tradition, I grew up, you know, in conservative environments, in really bad conservative environments, and their whole thing with spirituality was like, well, they didn't call it spirituality, but with belief and faith was the church, Bible, God gives you meaning. Like, you don't have meaning outside of these things, and you also can't put meaning on things. Meaning kind of happens to you. So when like I was trying to get rid of a lot of those toxic beliefs, I encountered, Will and I have talked about this, you know, endlessly, and Nick actually just checked this out and read this. When I encountered Jason Aaron's God Butcher, I was like, oh shit, like I'm finding meaning in this, and I'm also adding my experience and my story with it, like what Nick just said. I'm interacting with it, and because of that, I am gaining this meaning, this understanding that, I mean, the writer didn't intend for me to have my own personal, my personal story in mind when he was writing it. But I like that Nick said when we interact with things, that produces that meaning and purpose within us, within the topic. I had to ask that because it's a question that has been burning, and I figured it was appropriate for a discussion such as this with our theme of experiencing God as well.
That's
Right.
such a great, yeah, your question was super good. And, Pastor Wilbo Baggins, as a
Ooh.
professional, religious person that guides people on these spiritual journeys. like what, when, a lot of people who are a part of Homebrewed or just even our groups that are interact with Trip, like have experienced some sort of like religious trauma in a similar way that Ryan expressed, where it's like this canvas of, you can't interact with something, like, or your interaction doesn't mean anything or very little in comparison to like the meaning behind you. So like, how do you guide people, like, as far as like outside of, religious, or outside of like nerdy fandom spaces, but in actual religious spaces?
Yeah, I think yeah, that's such a good question. I think it's again, like, Dan Koch came to Theology Beer Camp. He has a podcast called You Have Permission, and I use that intro to You Have Permission for my like confirmation class to kind of set the stage to say, like, guys, you have permission to take the modern world and your faith seriously, and you have permission to ask questions. You have to engage with the text. I wish you would engage in the scripture texts. That engage with the scriptures as you would like a graphic novel of Thor the God Butcher or a Harry Potter novel. It's like engage in it, ask questions, wrestle with it, those kinds of things. And so I think that's the posture I give. But also, I hang out in Comic-Con spaces too, and for fun and to geek out, but also just to kind of like engage. You see people that are engaging in the big questions in a different kind of space to learn from it as well. I was at a Comic-Con a few years back, and I did a panel finding God in comics and just kind of open up the space, kind of like what we did with Systematic Geekology and other spaces. I created God Loves Geeks book club and in my church just to kind of like geek out on things together. And but we did this panel, and I saw somebody like cosplaying way in the back, like dressed as either like Little Red Riding Hood or Scarlet Witch, I don't know, dressed in red. And I noticed her kind of in the back corner.
There's a big difference there.
There's a big difference sometimes. But I think like I know she's back and didn't say much, kind of came in late, left early. I was like, oh, I hope she engaged in this. Well, a little bit later on in the Comic-Con, she's going down the escalator. I'm side by side with her. I'm like, oh, I noticed you at my panel earlier. What did you think? And she goes, I didn't know I could be both. I said, what? She goes, I didn't know I could be both. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, I didn't know I could be a geek and a person of faith at the same time. Her tradition told her that she couldn't be both. She had to choose between the two. God, and I think more and more you want to say, like, no, all our lives, if we're talking about experiencing God, this all intersectionality of like who we are. There's the danger of the single story. Like, yeah, I'm a pastor, but I'm also a surfer. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. All those things together, interact with one another. And I don't have to choose or compartmentalize those. Like, you can be both. You can be a geek and a person of faith. You can be a person who believes in science and be a person of faith. Like, all those things can happen together. So I don't know if that answered your question directly, but just trying to create those spaces and letting people know to break down the stereotype that you have to choose one or the other. And if not, then, this kind of competition between the two. So, yeah.
Will.
Yeah.
I want to tell you guys a church and pop culture horror story. This happened at my first internship during my stint at Bible college. I was interning at a wannabe mega church, and I was staying with a family they're pretty old school, but they were like down for the kids to kind of try their hand at this church stuff. And every Friday night, I would go down to the local comic book store and I would play Magic the Gathering. So if you've never played Magic the Gathering, Man, that is like a completely social activity. You are building relationships. You're sharing not only a game but also kind of like problem solving together. And if you do team style stuff, it's a really good community building time. And I was using that I had just moved an entire state away. I didn't know anybody, and really anybody I did know was just in that church space, in that, like that small group community style, kind of like just the copy and paste kind of church style. And I was like, man, I'm not really like vibing with any of these people. Like, I like them, they're good people, but I'm not really like vibing with them. Like, I don't like, and I know that sounds completely cringe me saying that, but like that was the feeling. It was like nobody here is like my person. Like, nobody here are my people. And so I went to F&M's, Friday Night Magics, and I mean, dude, it was the best $12 I spent every week because I'm making friends and things were going great. So I've been doing this for about 4 months now, and my supervisor hears from my host family that I go to this is how it was phrased to me. I go and play Satan games. Her words, not mine. Satan games every Friday at the local, I don't know what you call that, a bookstore. And so I was pulled into my supervisor's office. He was like, "It's got to stop, man. It's got to stop. Like, you are a representative of our church." And I was like, "What? What do you think is happening?" Like, what do you think is happening? Come to find out, she had completely cast a dispersion on this, not even knowing what it is. Not even knowing what it, like, I might as well have been doing a friggin' seance in like a witch's basement. Like it was a complete
Sacrificing those goats.
I was covered in goat blood.
I know.
But like I tell that story to just get at Will's point of like, sometimes like there's this disconnect and this miss of like, I was building relationships that I still hang on to this day. I got to work at my first Comic-Con because of that. I got to meet, amazing creators because of building those relationships. And what my church family, what my church body didn't see was all they saw was what they wanted to see from that culture. And then what was actually happening was I was building relationships with people that they had never even thought of. So there was that's kind of my horror story of how like those things just missed. They completely missed. And one of them, the guys at my comic book store didn't want anything to do with church because they hadn't really interacted with a guy like me before. And then that sounds really douchey. But also my church had never connected with that part because they didn't want to understand their culture. They didn't want to understand. So, yeah, that's any horror stories, anybody that something like that, I would love to hear them because I've experienced quite a few.
Well, it's horror story. It's also a cautionary tale because it's like, more and more and kind of what I like, what Trip does with this forum and Homebrewed and Theology Beer Camp is that it's like less judgment and more curiosity. And I think if this particular church community or person was like less judgmental but more curious, tell me more about what you do and what you do there, rather than judging first and making assumptions, then they would have learned what it's about and opened up the door and expanded relationships rather than close the doors and barriers between them.
Yeah.
And it's like, go to Comic-Cons, I see people out at front with sandwich boards going, burn in hell and Satan conference or the end is near. And yet they're on the outside, where is that going to change hearts or open relationships? You're shutting it down. But if you go inside and be with the people and listen to people and ask questions and authentically ask people what they're into and what they're wrestling with within these stories and meta narratives, then you're going to learn more about who they are as a particular person. You care for them as a person. And that's what I see unfolded at Beer Camp and within these kind of online forums that Trip is doing, but also in other spaces too. I think that's really, really important. Nick, I'm gonna go back to the God Butcher thing. So when Nick was at theology beer camp. We went around town and took him to my favorite barcade.
So
hung out
fun.
a
You
little bit.
paid for my first pinball machine game.
Yeah,
Thank
was
you.
talking.
Which game did you
Lord of the
play,
Rings.
Nick?
I did play the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
That one
pinball
was
machine.
super fun.
super
Baxter
fun.
Beercade.
Yeah,
play.
so it's my happy place. But like he was like, hey, I want some comic book recommendations, and I was like, at the top, Jason Aaron's The God Butcher run there at the beginning, what they made this movie out of, and all that kind of thing. But in terms of that narrative, the art, the story beats, all that stuff is just so freaking good. So Nick, you read it, you went
Yeah.
through it. What are your thoughts? What are the themes that you heard?
Yeah, dude.
I mean, out of this, the sacred text of this Thor comic. What
Yeah.
what did you experience?
You know.
What did you experience? And what questions came to the surface for you?
Man, you know what it is one of those texts that's life changing, and I think for people who particularly wrestle with like a nature of God that you're grown up with, like I feel like a lot of us are like either it's God's angry, right? It's explicitly he's angry,
Yeah.
and the only reason he cares about you is because he decided to kill his son, which is him. You know, that's the whole thing. Or it's like a mixed message where it's like God loves you more than anything, but he's still super pissed and he still needs to kill people.
But
And
he
you're
still
like,
kind of hates you.
yeah, and you're like, I'm so confused. And so this God that we're
Man.
supposed to love and we're supposed to emulate, you know, it's particularly the Christian tradition, as Jesus, you know, as revealed through that God ends up looking a lot like the devil or Satan or like the demons that we speak against. And so what I think the God Butcher does really well is that what's his name again? The actual God Butcher.
Gore.
Yeah, Gore. He says
Super
I have to
pleasant
kill.
name.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, he gores the shit out of some freaking gods too. It's incredible.
He hangs a bunch of dudes on meat hooks in like the first issue, and you're like, oh, we're not dealing with like a comic book villain anymore.
That was when I was like, I'm all in. Like when I saw that scene, and not because I mean the art was crazy, but also like how serious it was. Is
Yeah,
that Gore?
yeah.
I think you almost empathize and sympathize with him, where he's like, these gods promise to do stuff. I'm going to teach them a lesson, and you're like, that's what's up. I'm actually on board for you being this anti-hero. But at the
Right.
end, when his kid sees that, when he's called a god himself, when he's basically become what he's been trying to kill, and you're like,
Yep.
oh, like, you know. So anyway,
And he gets mega pissed about it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, when that realization is put in front of him, like, you've become the thing that you set out not to be. And he's like, no, I haven't. Like, paraphrasing, but he's like, no, I haven't. And it's like, dude, you freaking know you have. Like, you're trying to alter reality on a cosmic level. You're trying to extinguish the very idea that deities deserve to exist. There's a little bit of an ego in there. There's a little bit of a God complex in there. But like when he's confronted with that information, he gets mega pissed.
Dude,
Because
it's one of those things that actually made me like reflected on my own attitude, where it kind of humbled myself, where I've been, you know, kind of questioning my beliefs and kind of, you know, just rebuilding or constructing like what a God I can participate, live life with, worship, if you want to use that language. And a lot of it does stem from an anger of like this God that I grew up like,
yeah,
I want to be Gore the God Butcher. And so, and recognizing that like your intentions should reflect like the nature of what you're trying to do. And so just being like, if you're killing these gods, like it's actually, you're doing the very thing, you're enacting the very God that you are trying not to emulate. Anyway, yeah.
When we talked about this, when Will and I talked about this with Trip way back before Love and Thunder came out, Trip even said that that Gore brings up a good discussion that some gods, you know, I don't remember exactly how he said it, but some forms, some functions of how we perceive God or how we use God, like, need to die.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's
Totally.
no if, ands, or buts about that. Like, and I think that in saying that, I've read that story so many times. And when Tripp had said that in our conversation, I was like, oh, that's almost like a permission giving moment where it's like those really shitty and really unhealthy and really toxic views that were being pumped into me as a younger person, like it's okay for that to die, and I don't have to feel this remorse. I don't have to feel this guilt over it anymore. That this version that I was sold of a Jesus, that in my case was super militarized, super American focused, like that version of Jesus. I felt a little bit of remorse over that because it was the only thing I was told to believe in for so long. And then when I really latched onto God Butcher, when I really latched onto a few other different things, I was like, oh, it's okay that dies. It's okay. And I don't have to feel remorse over that because it deserves to die. That was, talk about having permission, Will.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah, and I
permission
think Tripp,
giving
I
moment.
forgot which psalm he quoted, but it was like one,
Oh
some gods
yeah.
deserve to die or should die. And yeah, that's the part of the story. And Jason Aaron comes up from at a point from like growing out of kind of fundamentalism, has said that he's an atheist, but he still likes the big questions. He's wrestling with what gods are worthy or not. And I feel like that's kind of what Tripp does with this podcast. He's discerning what gods are worthy or not, and I think that's what we did at Beer Camp. That's what we do in other forums, the other God pods who are part of it, discerning what gods are worthy or not, and lowercase g, uppercase g, or what is worthy. And a big part of that story too, that touches me, is that within this story, Jason Aaron weaves in this idea of this kind of displaced time of different ages of Thor. So you have like young Thor before he's worthy to pick up the hammer. You have like middle-aged Thor who's like in his prime and like can pick up the hammer. And then you have like old man Thor who is now Odin and is the King Thor, and they all have to team up together to try to defeat Gore. And for me, as I think about like Will at 18, Will fresh out of seminary,
long
like
hair surfer bro, Will.
Yeah, long hair surfer guy. I'm just a bald head surfer guy now. With it takes a little longer to stand up. My knees aren't as
yes.
But I can still catch some waves. Don't distract me with surfing, Ryan. But you have like 18-year-old Will, fresh out of seminary Will, and then you have like 50-year-old Will. And what if all three of us had to get together to team up to solve a problem or to save the world or whatever? We would probably not get along. We'd have different views of things. We'd probably think each other were stupid or too old or too idealistic or something. But as we think about like our experience in God and who we are as people, we change and evolve over time. And so it also give ourselves permission that, yeah, maybe 30-year-old Will didn't have it all together. There's some parts he did, some didn't. 50-year-old Will still learning. So that part of that story, in terms of wrestling with what it means to be a god or to save from this villain, was a big part. And I think when we talk about experiencing God and these communities we are part of, also being easy on ourselves with where we are in the process and what we're learning.
Isn't that so true? That like I've even had like hard moments where like I feel like I've reached a certain level of enlightenment, and then I look down at the guy I used to be. But what's really difficult in that kind of self-reflection is that the guy I used to be helped form the guy I am now. So like his mistakes, his wins, his experience helped me to where I am now. And in 5-10 years, I'm going to be able to say the same thing. So like, when you're going through like a hard time and when you're like not sure which way is up, and you think like, oh, past me had it so good, or past me had something figured out, like just remember, like in 5 years, 10 years, however many years you get, you're gonna keep asking that question. You're gonna keep assessing yourself. So like, do you know what, because apparently Dan Koch's getting paid by the mention. You have permission to take it a little easy on yourself.
That's
It's
right.
like,
And all this discussion around like a comic book, it's like a joke is like, aren't those just funny books for kids? And you're like,
no,
no,
Grandpa, they're really good now.
they're really good now. Like the art's good, and it's not just like Archie and friends. And Archie
I knew you were
has
going to reference Archie because I was going to reference Jughead.
Archie has some like pretty awesome stories over the last few years. Like there's been some like great Archie comics that wrestle with heavy stuff. So like, yeah, it's a different medium and venue by which a story is told, and they're still wrestling with the things that everybody wrestles with, which wants me to transition over to like Talking Heads. Like you guys had a pretty packed room at beer camp. Trip gave
They were a
like,
good warm-up act for us, Will.
They were, but Trip, in a very moving moment, you can hear on the podcast, shares about his favorite part of Lord of the Rings with Sam and Frodo having this deep conversation about what they will be remembered as and the stories and songs that they will sing. And he is tearing up. The room was tearing up. I was tearing up. Like this kind of sacred text of deep truths within these. Like, that's what Nick and Trip are trying to do at Talking Heads. And with the next project you're doing with like Tolkien as sacred text, is that still happening? Is there things going on with that, Nick?
Yeah, we're still working on it. I think just, with life stuff, we recorded 2 episodes and we're kind of trying to figure out schedules and everything, and, just segments and all that. But we do plan to do that. And, not saying it, Trip and I are trying to work on like an online mini conference about Tolkien stuff. That's going to be online in May, potentially, if it does happen. So be on the lookout. That's specifically is just geared around Tolkien and theology and deep questions like that, and as opposed to being like an introductory class to Tolkien.
Yeah.
And can you imagine someone going to like Tolkien and saying, "Hey, you have to choose. Are you a person of faith or do you like high fantasy? You have to choose between one or the other." He was like, "What? What are you talking about? Like,
dude,
you're messing with dragons and wizards. You're telling Satan stories." He'd been like, "What?
Satan games?
Satan games? Woo."
Dude, besides, I do love Satan, but you were talking about just those distinctions, but I also growing up we went to an evangelical church, and my parents converted when I was very young, so they were like, we're all like first generation evangelical Christians, and the Lord of the Rings were coming out when I was a kid, and I wanted to see it, and there was a mom who was talking about it's evil, it's witchcraft, and couldn't see it, and I basically told my mom, and I didn't even look it up. I was like too young to really use the internet properly, and so one of my friends was like, "Oh yeah, he's a Christian, like he's a Christian author." And I told my mom that. I was like, "He's a Christian, he can't be evil." And she was like, "Oh, okay." And now my parents are also like giant Tolkien nerds.
We'll come back to that statement. Oh man, you could probably do an entire like 2-hour podcast based on the statement, "He's a Christian, he can't be evil." Oh my.
So true.
Nick, can I ask you well, of course I can. I could probably ask you a Tolkien question. You're the most qualified person here.
Yes, please.
So why is it that's the most annoying fucking thing about Lord of the Rings? Why is it that Chronicles of Narnia is totally okay in like Christian church spaces, but like Lord of the Rings sometimes gets shit on, Harry Potter mega gets shit on, but like other forms of fantasy are like, oh, that's the occult and that's terrible and that's demonic and all the buzzwords they don't even know but throw out there. Why is it that Chronicles of Narnia gets a pass, but the other ones have to go through the ringer? And Lord of the Rings is a little more like widely accepted, I think. At least it was like in the circles that I was growing up with. But like, why does Chronicles of Narnia get a pass and everybody else, especially Harry Potter, has to jump through a freaking hoop with these crazy people?
It gets in my goat, dude. Like that whole conversation related to so many things. There's like a school of interpretation within like conservative Christian circles, and not shitting on conservative Christians, because there's some conservative Christians that are like, I respect, and, but just like people who I feel like aren't really being intellectually honest. Is that they're saying they're interpreting something objectively, but instead they're assimilating something into their own interpretation of the world and then
Ooh.
creating a caricature of something. So C.S. Lewis has become an evangelical, extreme right wing caricature. And so people who are just maybe a little more wary of cultural stuff, secularism and things like that, they just know C.S. Lewis as, oh, he was an evangelist, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Where other people haven't quite been assimilated into that world and gone through like the factory, reassembly into
Right.
the digestible version. And that's actually kind of a battle going on in Tolkien, in the world of Tolkien fandom as well as Tolkien academia, is that people are the C.S. Lewis people are kind of trying to make Tolkien assimilate him into that. And if you don't know, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were really good friends. Tolkien actually led C.S. Lewis to becoming a Christian. C.S. Lewis was like a very hardcore atheist, which is very ironic.
Don't tell them. Don't tell them.
Don't tell them that. And the fact that Tolkien was a Catholic, that makes it even worse.
Really don't tell them that.
Yeah, that's right. But that's basically why people love the Chronicles of Narnia, because of Aslan the Lion Jesus, and there's no correspondence to like Aragorn, the Jesus of Middle Earth or whatever. Yeah.
I feel like you are the person I know that's, you're the most accessible person I know that's the most qualified to answer that question. And that used to just rub me the wrong way, because I was like, oh, we can watch Chronicles of Narnia. I'm like, or we can watch Return of the King and watch like a badass movie.
Right.
Like, but like Chronicles of Narnia is like about Jesus. And I'm like, ugh. Come on. Like,
all right, I got another story. I'm gonna level up a little bit. So you have like Narnia, then you have Lord of the Rings, and then you have Game of Thrones.
Oh, don't even.
And so here we go. Like high fantasy,
I will tear this conversation a new one. Let's go.
Religion within that. And I didn't have HBO for many years until HBO Max. Finally get it. My wife and I just finished binge watch that. I knew the tropes of what happened to Game of Thrones, not the big stuff, but the nuances along the way. Man, it's so freaking good. Like I was just captivated. I knew it was a red wedding, and it was going to be that red of a wedding. And so there's those kinds of things. Well, my daughters who are in college have been watched it as well. And so we all wrapped up, and I went to go visit them a few Sundays back on a ski trip up in the North Carolina mountains, App State. We went to Lutheran church up there where they do campus ministry, and the pastor was giving a sermon, and it was a really good sermon. He started talking about like Israel being real scared and always kind of at risk of being invaded from the north. People coming from the north, and always someone coming from the north coming its way. And then there's the people of the south who have their own idea of how to do things. And then you also have this battle of the throne of like this who wants to be king and the seduction of power and all that kind of stuff. And Ella leans over and is like, she was like, Dad, that sounds just like Game of Thrones. It's Game of Thrones. That's Game of Thrones. I was like, 100%. And I was like, George Martin knew what he was writing. Yes, the Bible is just as like violent and just as crazy, and the seduction of power and exploitative of women and luring. I mean, it's just like there's so much there within the scripture themselves that are just as real. So that those connections, you're kind of like, well, why would you ever read that? Because or watch Game of Thrones because of that evil stuff? Then he's like, have you ever read some of these stories in scripture?
Dude,
it's like,
yes, 100%.
Like read, okay, just for an exercise, read like post, and I know there's about 1,000. Every single person watching this right now, listening to it, is more qualified to say what I'm about to say. I get it. Like I've been out of the game for a year or two, but like if you read Joshua and then just like read Joshua and like 1st and 2nd Kings and tell me that isn't fucking Game of Thrones. I'm serious. To me, it's like Game of Thrones is great storytelling, like great character building, all that stuff. And it's like, I've been around a lot of prudish people that are like, well, there's the inappropriate stuff. I'm like, are we talking about nudity and sex scenes? Can we just like be adults about it and just say that out loud?
Right.
Because they never once say the violence turned me off to it. They never like no conservative Christian I've ever met talking about Game of Thrones has been like, too many people got their heads cut off.
Yeah,
usually that's the part they love the most.
Beheadings. I can't believe like you would watch someone being beheaded. I'm like, dude, in the freaking gospel, someone has a head served on a platter.
Right?
Like, it's like I can't wait to do that on a children's message one Sunday. It's like, all right, kids, like let me tell you the story of how John the Baptist died. It's like that's so real. It's like a part of reality.
And just notice too, it's always the nudity has to do with like boobs and stuff. It's never the penis, because there's tons of penis in Game of Thrones. And no one's
usually like that guy's packing.
That's right. They're like, dang, there's penis in the show. That's wild. And then the boobs.
That's
wild.
They're
like, my kids can't watch. There's boobs in this.
Yeah, no, it's just funny. It's just funny how like people will pick and choose what things are. I remember like who didn't grow up in the church and hear a Braveheart message.
Totally, 100%.
Like everybody, if you want to talk about congregation, for the next 6 weeks, we're going to do a sermon series on masculinity. So I hope you're all you're caught up on your Mel Gibson movies, because we're going to quote every single fucking one of them. And then Braveheart's always like this, like that's what a real man, that's a warrior of God. And it's like, don't all those guys in the Old Testament die? Like, most of them horribly. Like, again, the Old Testament is more Game of Thrones than people ever want to give it credit for. And it's like, come on, let's be honest. The Bible is if the Bible were a movie, like from beginning to end, dude, that thing is rated R for all sorts of stuff. It's rated R for sort of stuff that we don't even like. We can't even mention.
So good. So good. Yeah, so these, all right, so those Thor, Lord of the Rings, we really kind of got into like the Vikings, Norse, high fantasy stuff. Like, all right, we did a little bit of Star Wars.
Why don't we get to, Will, we were talking before off screen, everybody, like we were talking about Will, like me and Ryan are like the nerds in training. Like if we're talking about Sopranos, like freaking Will is Tony Soprano of nerds right now. Ooh. And we're like freaking Christopher trying to learn from him. And we're like we just got made, like, but we're still learning. So like, Will, tell us about like stuff that you're like nerding on, or like Star Wars or whatever you want. Because you experienced God, and
you were there from the beginning.
Too. I was there. Yeah. Let me pull some geek cred, as you said, like a weird flex at like, or just date myself that the first movie I saw was when I was 5 years old, A New Hope, in the theaters.
And Will, do you ever feel like, we quoted Lord of the Rings earlier, or Chronicles of Narnia earlier? Do you ever feel like Aslan when like some young pup is like, don't go back on your word, and you're like, do not recite the deep magic to me. I was there when it was written. I hope I didn't like completely butcher that line, but that's how I figure Will in like conversations with like younger nerds. It's like, haha, okay, do not recite the deep magic.
Do I feel like Aslan? Did you just ask me if I feel like Aslan? I think that's kind of what you asked.
I think I more asked you if you felt like Liam Neeson, but interpret that however you want, because if you're Liam Neeson, you get to be, I don't know, you get to be Qui-Gon Jinn, you get to be Aslan, you get to be Ra's al Ghul, like you get to be all these cool freaking guys.
Yeah, I think it's so funny that like Tony in the comments is like, myth is myth is myth, myth points to truth, and I do think kind of like postmodern post-Christian myth art is like the MCU or the Star Wars movies, so that kind of thing, and but it's so layered with like the original trilogy, and then the prequels, and then you have the Disney era, and these different factions and denominations within denominations
totally
and traditions in the canon itself, and who's in charge or not, and you have the Pope Kathleen Kennedy, and people can't stand Kathleen Kennedy, get her out, but then you have Mando, you have the TV streaming stuff, and it's so good, and we should do more of that, and we're like Andor. Why can't it be more like Clone Wars? I mean, you have all those kind of stuff going on, and I geek out hard on that, and I try to have a posture of like, have fun with it. don't and I think that's what Ryan does with his podcast. There's too many like geek podcasts out there that just want to like, here's my hot take and why everything's wrong, kind of stuff. But we're like,
Here's why
hey,
James Gunn is a shithead and he doesn't know what he's talking about.
James Gunn has ruined my
Even though
childhood.
I've never made a movie ever.
Yeah, James Gunn ruined my childhood, but I didn't like the other movies anyway. But why am I?
Yeah, I didn't like the other movies, but I haven't seen any of these movies yet. But I'm gonna, you know what? My expert opinion says they're all gonna suck.
Yeah, all I'm saying is that Scooby-Doo ruled. Okay.
James Gunn did a Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, he did like the live action Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Wow. Now I feel like we're like nerd-splaining to him, Nick.
Oh, dude, fully. Yeah. I'm nerd-splaining. Yeah, that's a good pull too. No, but I think again, like it within these fandoms, it's the same tropes, the same toxicity as others. So yeah, you can posture. How are you going to posture yourself? Are you going to be open and more curious and less judgmental? Or do you want to go in and have fun? You get out what you put into it. So if you're going to go in thinking like, they're going to change everything, this sucks, you're going to come out feeling that way. If you go in like, want to have fun, and I'll admit, like Thor: Love and Thunder, I went in to have fun. And I had fun, and I left going, yeah, I had fun in that. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, wait a minute, I really love that original graphic novel, and I can't believe they didn't do this. Or why did they do that? Why didn't they split it in 2 movies? I can't believe Gord's cool in some of the part, but not all the part. And I like Jane Foster, but not. Why do they have to do this? So you overthink it like you do with everything. And I wish I would have done things a little differently. But guess what? I'm not getting paid for that, and no one asked me, and I probably would do a horrible job anyway. So.
How many podcasts could have, like, if you were like an honest podcaster, you could just be like, why did I start this podcast? Well, if I was honest, no one asked me to, but I wanted to talk into a microphone and share my opinions with people.
Right.
Dozens of people have heard my opinions on this.
Dozens of people can't wait to hear my hot take. But then the other, on the flip side, okay, here's another thing. Like, so I had a church member this past Sunday. I did a little episode on Systematic Ecology about Groundhog Day, and one of my favorite movies of all time. And we just kind of talked about the meaning and some theology and philosophy behind it, and time loops, and what do you do with it? We heard a very wise philosopher at Beer Camp say, what do you do with your finitude? And man, if that's not Groundhog Day, I don't know what is. Yeah. And so we were talking about that, and this member, he's like, man, I always thought that like Groundhog Day was just like a silly rom-com. And I was like, I'm gonna go back and watch this with some of the things you talked about. And he's like, man, I was blown away. You're right. It's so deep. It's just such a deep movie. And I'm like, yeah, there you go. So how do you look at things, and how can they help, give meaning to your life, edify your life, make you a better person, to deeper in your relationships with your family and your friends and all that stuff. So all that's being said, I don't mind being Daddy Aslan. No, just kidding.
All I'm saying is that you were talking about Liam Neeson, like, gets to be all these cool people, and like Aslan is like Jesus lion. Like, Jesus only gets to be Jesus. Like, Liam Neeson gets to be so many other people. So right. Liam Neeson's so much cooler.
Jesus only gets to be Jesus. I don't know what that even means, but I know it's like too profound for my brain to understand. I'm gonna come out of the studio, aka the laundry closet, and then my wife's gonna be like, how did it go? And I'm like, Nick said this thing that like Jesus only gets to be Jesus, and now my entire week is ruined. Oh my gosh.
So good. Well, other hanging threads out there we need to tackle before.
One thing I was gonna mention, because I mentioned Harry Potter earlier, and that's like a few people have read that book, a few people have seen those movies. I think it's probably nominally popular, but like, I am just now reading through those books for the first time. My wife has read them like a dozen times, and she's a big fan. And I'm sure, every single person that's read the books multiple times is like, I'm the biggest Harry Potter fan ever. It's like Star Wars. It's like, I'm the biggest Star Wars fan. It's like, I guarantee you're not, because your name ain't George Lucas or Dave Filoni. But like what I've noticed with my read through of Harry Potter is so many different topics show up in the things we enjoy. And then like, because we were talking about it earlier, like the accessible, the on ramp that fandom gives, and Will mentioned like with my show, like what I really try to do is have the positive side of that conversation, because like so much of nerd culture and fandom is like it feeds off our negativity. It's like news. It's like we feed off of negativity so much that sometimes like when you're overly positive, people are like, why are you being so overly positive? It's like, because I choose not to be negative. And I don't know why that's so controversial, but like when I started going into these Harry Potter books, I noticed like topics showed up that I didn't even anticipate. I just got done doing a recording last week. We're in the beginning stages of Chamber of Secrets, and I had a 20-minute conversation about toxic masculinity within a Harry Potter book. So like your fandoms may not like specifically be about that thing, but it doesn't mean that that topic can't live in that space. Does that make sense? Like, it's just something I was thinking about as a loose end from earlier. But yeah, Muggles, Magic and Mischief is like my side project, and it's one of those topics where I get to be the learner there, because so many times like people start podcasts and it's like, here's what I know about this topic. And when it's really weird being the novice in a show and a fandom where I think I know some stuff, but then like things completely surprise me, and I kind of love it. But taking that, Will mentioned, taking that posture of finding something that you can engage with a posture of a learner, and then just learn what that fandom might have for you. I think it'd be fun if like we like listeners, like what's like a, you know, pick a fandom, like what's something that you, if you had the right posture, you could probably learn a lot from. Like Game of Thrones, that's a good one that we mentioned earlier. People
man, how
often
about
have a bad posture towards Game of Thrones.
Dungeons and Dragons? Like, man,
Oh yeah,
Trip's gonna be proud of this, but man, how process is Dungeons and Dragons? How
Come on,
how
baby,
open and
come on.
relational is that
it's
story? Yeah,
the
you have
most process.
it's the most process. You have a DM who sets the story, but it really is the interaction with other people that changes the storyline. They can't predict what's going to happen. You have the dice that you roll. Like there's some things you could never predict is going to happen. Yeah, you have your character, you have your standards, you have your rules within the universe itself that help guide you. But man, it's open and relational because you're in relation. It's a community of community storytelling, and so that's what's going on. So that kind of fandom is so fun, and I think that's why those areas are growing, and people feel safe to gather in those spaces and experience one another in community, and dare I say, even God, the God is there. Yeah,
Isn't it crazy, guys? How? Oh, sorry, Nick. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
you go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, Will mentioned this earlier, how like so many people have been on Homebrewed that are like, they got more degrees than a thermometer. Like they like the smartest of the smart of the smart. And then it's like we're like the ugly stepchildren. We're just like playing in the basement with our like silly like our role playing games. We're like, I rolled a natural D20. That's so exciting, guys. Like
Hey.
that's how I feel like in the homebrewed Christianity multiverse. I feel like we're the ones where it's like those guys are kind of like we're weird, like we get it, but they're like kind of like weird, like we're worried about them.
Can I just say something?
Trip just rolled some dice with on the Pete Ends.
He did, and it was so rad, dude.
It was so good. Yeah, he integrated that.
Well, I know people who study nerd culture and like fan studies and fan fiction people, and all the stuff that are like that you're talking about. Those people with degrees who are like studying theory. People have shown that like fan theorists and fandoms, like going back to like freaking Sherlock Holmes cosplayers, like we're wrestling with those things before theorists were. So we're the ugly stepchildren, but we figured it out before the people spent hundreds of thousands of
OG
dollars
existentialists.
We were like doing it before it was cool.
That's right. We are totally the theological, theoretical hipsters. But I know that we're coming close to the end of time here. But I want to hear, because I know this is what y'all do. but what are y'all nerding out on? And then also, where
Oh,
can people find you as far as your creative spaces?
what am I
So
nerding
Uh,
we'll start out with Ryan, and then Will, and then I'll end, and then we'll wrap it up.
yeah.
I'm gonna pull my co-host in here for this last part.
Oh man, look at
We
that,
think Ben.
Ben.
He watches me do all of my podcasting. And I'll just put you over here for right now. It's like the biggest Funko I have, so I'm very excited about it. But anyway, I know. So at the beginning of the year, I think it was actually over Christmas. I had rewatched Werewolf by Night for like the third time, and I freaking loved Werewolf
So
by Night.
good.
For Halloween every year, I like to watch like a horror movie, but I'm not like a slasher Jason or Freddy Krueger kind of guy. Like I love old horror movies. So I had rewatched all of the Mummy movies, the old Universal Mummy movies for Halloween, and then I watched Werewolf by Night. And I'm like, dude, I am feeling this old school black and white horror, like sometimes so bad it's good, like
Yeah,
it's
so
so
good.
so good it's good kind of thing. So what I'm currently nerding out on is I am watching every Universal monster movie. And so for people that don't know what that is, like Universal, the studio, they in the 30s, 40s, and early 50s, they produced all of these like some of them serious and kind of like they took themselves seriously, but most of them kind of campy and like monster rally kind of films. I love them, and I don't know when else I'll get to talk about them. But if I'm doing like I'm almost keeping like a diary on my personal Instagram at I am Ryan Doze. So if you want terribly worded but like kind of somewhat philosophical, look through the Universal monster movies. That's what I'm currently nerding out on, and I also love them because they're like an hour long. And it's like I can watch 2 movies in the span of like I can do like a double feature, creature feature. But like that's what I'm nerding on them is like old horror movies. And yeah, that's probably not the answer you thought you were gonna get, but that's what I'm loving.
Nice. That's good. Like at the end of Systematic, before the end, we talk about what we geek out on, and then we make recommendations. And yeah, I feel like I have my finger on the pulse of like geek culture. But man, my hosts and the people that I team up with and the guests that we have on, whenever I share what they're geeking out on, I'm always learning something new with a new show or a new venue or a video game or something. I'm not a huge gamer, but learning about these things. So one thing I'm geeking out on right now is HBO's Max, The Last of Us, which is the kind of post-apocalyptic zombie. Yet, I mean, uh, Ryan talked about fungus getting inside, like toxicity, and well, fungus is taking over, and there's a hive mind, and it's crazy. If you like the zombie genre, and so deep, because I think the post-apocalyptic genre really holds up a mirror of forcing you to think through what you really care about, and if it was the end of time, and you're playing survivalist, what would you hold on to the most? Would you hold on to power? Would you hoard food just for yourself? Would you try to save others? So all those tricks are there, and man, it's beautifully done. It's like a zombie show, except with like HBO money, and they're doing it. I guess it was a former video game. In the last episode I watched was just so beautiful. This love story of survival, and I turned to my wife. I was like, "This was a video game? What the world?" So yeah, that's what I'm geeking out on, and yeah, you can find me. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram as well, Will and Rose. But Systematic Geekology is the podcast that I kind of help curate and a part of to talk about the intersection of philosophy and theology and those things we geek out on. And then I'm often on Ryan's podcast,
He is.
Across the Bifrost, where I'm known as
I
Will
probably should have mentioned my podcast.
Yeah. Will Prime. I'm on Will Prime on that one. And
that may be our dumbest joke we've done yet, Will, by the way.
Joke ever.
I've listened to the Listener Prime thing. It may be the dumbest thing we've done.
So dumb is good.
So yeah, I was like, so bad it's good. So bad it's good.
And we just kind of go through the Thor comics, but also what's going on in kind of Thor pop culture with TV shows and movies. And is a lot of fun. So,
Yeah.
and I, as much as I've collected comics, and I still have my weekly pull list at my local comic book store and all those things. I haven't run a ton of Thor comics, so Ryan's like giving me homework of like read this so we can talk about it. So I'm still learning as we go.
We got lots of good stuff coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Nick,
need,
what are you nerding out about?
Besides Lord of the Rings constantly, it is right now I am watching The Sopranos. So this is my first time going through The Sopranos.
nice.
I'm on the last season, so I'm very stoked. And then I've also been watching My Hero Academia, which is a superhero anime. It is incredible.
Very good.
If y'all needed some more superhero content in your life. That's what I'm nerding out on right now. If y'all haven't known too, for what I've done Tolkien Heads with Trip from Homebrewed, and you can go to Tolkien Heads. You can just go to Homebrewed Christianity, tripfuller.com, sign up there. And then I mentioned my Substack, and Ryan mentioned my Substack. He got to read. I'm doing like this intersection between Tolkien and pop culture. And so just come hang out, comment pop culture stuff that you like, and we'll even talk about stuff more than Tolkien. And we even might talk about spirituality and super nerdy religious stuff like we did tonight. So, but you should also go subscribe to Systematic Geekology, Across the Bifrost, and Muggles,
Magic, and Mischief.
Boom. Do all those things. It's in the chat. You can rewatch the stream as much as you want. This has been Super Power Happy Hour, co-hosted by Will Wilbo Baggins Rose, Ryan Does, Nick Polk. We will see you next time. Many smooches. Peace.
You.